our guard down. I think that it's a story this morning about someone who is forced to deal with their uncleanliness. And I'll be talking about that again on Sunday. Hobie, one of the things that we do is I tend to further unpack the text that I'll be preaching or that Matt will be preaching on Sunday. So we kind of walk through that here, and it gives you a little bit of insight, but I also try not to give away where I'm going. Sometimes I do, sometimes I too fully play my hand, but we'll try not to do that as much today. So we're continuing our journey through Luke, and this is our last week in Luke for a long time. We move into Acts for 8 weeks. Matt will be preaching on the Ascension, and after preaching on the Ascension, he'll be preaching on Pentecost, and those are his last 2 Sundays. So he's been a great gift and a wonderful teacher in this setting and in the life of our church. So I know you want to come and give thanks for his work and celebrate his ministry here in this place. This is a story that I have heard over and over again. It's a short story. It's only in the Gospel of Luke. And the way that it's always taught is, where are the 9? Where are the 9? You may have even heard that phrase yourself. Where are the 9? And so we move into the text in the 17th chapter of Luke. Russell asked me how I was doing this morning, and I said I was doing okay. And then I remembered that I'm not doing as great as I had hoped. My son was supposed to come home this weekend. We were headed to New York City for our anniversary, and then that didn't work out for a variety of reasons. We just couldn't figure it out. So we decided to fly him home for our anniversary, so we would get to see him. We hadn't seen him since Thanksgiving, and he tested positive last night. So, and I had already killed the fatted calf. If anybody wants to come over, I've got a huge brisket defrosting in the refrigerator. So I'm sure that will be available on Saturday if you just want to come by. Hopefully, we'll be glad to welcome you. So they're on their way to Jerusalem. We're kind of backtracking a little bit. You remember that Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem in Luke 9:51, and there was that whole movement toward Jerusalem and toward the cross after coming down the hill from the Mount of Transfiguration. We're back in that story, and Luke wants you to know that we're still on the way. And on the way, Jesus is going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. This is less a geography lesson than sort of an understanding of the world. Because if you go back through Luke's geography at this point, it's pretty awkward as to where they physically are. But it's Jesus navigating the in-between. Jesus navigating those boundaries that we set up for ourselves. And Jesus is walking that region between Samaria and Galilee. It's as though he's almost in Jerusalem and then he heads back north. So I think this is more a figurative understanding than a physical understanding. And as he entered a village, 10 men with a skin disease. Now, this has never been translated skin disease before. It has always been translated as leprosy. It's always been translated as leprosy, but our modern day understanding of leprosy, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, Hansen's disease, is not, it was not what they would have had in that day. And they often attributed a variety of skin diseases to be leprosy. So if there was something going on with your skin that was unexplainable, they would call it leprosy in those days. But what we call leprosy today is probably not what they were calling leprosy in those days. So these 10 men had a skin disease. As he entered a village, 10 men with a skin disease approached him. And they would have been living at the edge of the city, because as soon as you got something like that, people could physically see that you were different. And when they physically saw that you were different, you were ostracized. So not only was there a physical issue, but there was a social and cultural issue, and you were pushed out to the edges of the city, and you had to keep your distance. And, I think we've never before in our lives perhaps understood that distance keeping like we have in recent days and in recent months. They were quarantined. They were quarantined in their own little area outside the city, keeping their distance. So they approached him, but they still kept their distance, and they called out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy upon us." This is a prayer. This is a plea. "Jesus, Master, have mercy upon us." When he saw them, too many other people had overlooked them, but Jesus actually saw them. And isn't that one of the gifts of Jesus, is seeing us where we are in our vulnerability, in whatever we might be dealing with and going through. He saw them and he said to them, go and show yourselves to the priests. And I don't want to say too much about that one because I'm going to be preaching on that little piece there on Sunday. But go and show yourselves to the priest. And as they went, they were made clean. They were cleansed as they went. They were cleansed in their obedience to Jesus' instruction to go and show themselves to the priest. Then one of them said, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he prostrated himself. Make sure you understand what word that is. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. So the one person, it doesn't say he was the only Samaritan. They're on the border between Samaria and Galilee. We don't know what mix of people there were, but these were people who were united in their pain. They were united in being ostracized. So you've got probably, faithful Jews and Samaritans who are mixed up in this group of 10 people sitting outside the city, and they would not have spent this kind of time together unless they all had a similar issue. And so their pain brought them together. And then Jesus asked, we're not 10 made clean, so where are the other 9? And sermon after sermon after sermon, lesson after lesson, it's always concentrated on this. Where are the other 9? You're the one that showed up. You're thankful. You, this person who would be the most unlikely to return, the Samaritan, is the one that comes back. So where are the other 9? Did none of them return to give glory to God except this foreigner? And they're on the border between Samaria and Galilee, but Jesus is trying to make a point over and over again. Perhaps it's a point about the faithful Jews not recognizing the time of their visitation. It's the faithful Jews who have already been given the gift, and the Samaritan who doesn't necessarily realize fully the gift from God. He then realizes the gift that he's been given. Then he said to them, get up. Then he said to him, get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well. And there's a transition in the verbs here. The healing verb is a verb that comes from the word catheter. Anybody know that word well? Catheter. So it's not the most healing. One of the worst stories of my life was I went to go visit my uncle, Thomas Jefferson Harris. He was in the hospital. And as I was leaving, I went up to hug him. And I hugged Uncle Tom. And after I hugged him, I pulled away from the bedside and I caught his catheter with my foot. I used to be his favorite nephew. Not after that. So the first one is your faith. They are healed, and you just can't unsee or feel that, right? So the first one was that he is healed, and the second one is you are made whole. You are saved. You are made well in a larger sense than physical healing. So let's think about leprosy today. I know that's something that's on the tip of your tongue. Half the cases occur in India, and there's still leper colonies all over the world. The condition is ancient, but it's different than it was in those times. So skin diseases still occur. And some of the research that I did this week said vitamin D is really good for people trying to deal with COVID, and vitamin D is really good for people who are dealing with leprosy. So that was one of my learnings this week. COVID and leprosy came up in one of my searches. Today, 208,000 people are infected, most of them in Asia and Africa, but 100 people in the US are diagnosed every year, mostly in the South, California, and Hawaii. And there was that famous leper colony in Hawaii. Here's a picture of what it might look like on someone's ear. Some Hansen's disease, some sort of skin disease. And the signs and symptoms of leprosy today are like discolorment of a piece of skin on the body, muscle weakness, a loss of eyebrows or eyelashes. Which is interesting. Painless swelling or lumps on the face and ears, and numbness in part of the skin. But it can have devastating effects. Leprosy really can take a lot out of someone. These deformities come from leprosy today, and it comes from a slow-growing bacteria, Mycobacterium leprae. It can affect the nerves, skin, eyes, and lining of the nose. But with early diagnosis, it's treatable. And here's kind of a world map where it's most prevalent. You can see that for the most part, the warmer your country is, the more likely there's going to be, and the denser the population. So you have a dense population in India and Brazil, and you have higher incidence even today of leprosy. But it's less sort of skin diseases in general. They say that there are 2 to 3 million people worldwide who are permanently disabled because of leprosy, and India, Brazil, and Indonesia are the top 3 places. As he entered the city, 10 men with a skin disease approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy upon us." So then he says, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." Does anybody remember where that comes from? There's a whole chapter in the Old Testament about leprosy. If you want to do some fun reading this evening, turn to the 13th chapter of Leviticus, and it's all about the laws concerning leprosy. These skin diseases, were highly transmittable, and they seem to know and understand that. And so this is what's spoken of in the Old Testament. "And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when a man has a skin of his body, a swelling, a scab, or a bright spot, it becomes on the skin of his body like a leprous sore, then he should be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of the sons of the priest. The priest shall examine the sore of the skin of the body, and if the hair on the sore has turned white." So if you have any of these issues, please come to David Melton. "And the sore appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it's a leprous sore, then the priest shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. But if the bright spot is white on the skin of his body and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and its hair is not turned white, then the priest shall isolate the one who has the sore for 7 days." Brilliant quarantine. It's half a quarantine. And it continues on. I mean, this is a whole chapter on leprosy. "And the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. And indeed, if the sore appears to be as it was, and the sore is not spread on the skin, then the priest shall isolate him another 7 days. And the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. And indeed, if the sore is faded and the sore is not spread on the skin, then the priest shall announce him clean. It is only a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab should at all spread over the skin after he's been sent to the priest for his cleansing, he shall be seen by the priest again. And if the priest sees the scab is indeed spread on the skin, then the priest shall announce him unclean. It is leprosy." Today, I'm going to skip that next slide. We'll just go to, you've heard enough about leprosy, right? Do you want to learn more? No? My wife went to see her doctor the other day over at Emory, and her doctor's Indian, and her doctor's father had gone back to India, and while he was in India, he came down as COVID positive. And so what they did is they came to his house and they put out one of these quarantine signs. How would that be here? You've got a positive diagnosis and they put a sign on your door to let everyone know that you were COVID positive. How would that go in the US today? Not so well, but and they even describe who it is. So in the next slide, they filled one of these in so that you can see it. The whole family and their address and the number of persons. And then they even tell you the dates that they're quarantined. I wonder if that could have helped slow the spread here. If when you were diagnosed, it was put on your house and your mailbox, so everybody in your neighborhood knew. It was very disconcerting for this woman's father. It was a sense of shame. He had this sense of shame. It was bad enough that he got COVID, but it was worse. And he was so embarrassed to have got home and then to have, because of him, and probably nothing that he had done, but because of him, to have this red sign upon him. I've got more about the rules of leprosy. It goes on and on and on. It talks about the flesh changes and how you'll be known that you are clean. So what Jesus is telling them is to obey the law. He's telling them to obey the law. He's come to fulfill the law, not to negate the law. And he tells them to go and to see the priests. It goes on here. I mean, if the body receives a burn on the skin by fire and the raw flesh of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish, white, or white, then the priest shall examine it. And if the hair in the bright spot is turned white and it appears deeper in the skin, it is leprosy broken out in the burn. This stuff is pretty specific, isn't it? But it's because, God has revealed this to them. But I also think that their experience. And then finally, in verse 29, if a man or a woman has a sore in the head or the beard, then the priest shall examine the sore. And indeed, if it appears deeper than the skin and there is a thin yellow, you get the idea. If it is deeper than the skin, that is probably leprosy. And it keeps going on. It is a whole chapter on the rules about leprosy. And then finally, in verse 45, this is the one that's really the most important to us today. Now the leper on whom the sore is, his clothes shall be torn. So they rended their clothes, which is what you do in grief. When there is grief, there's a time to rend and a time to sew. When somebody died in your family, you would rip your clothes and you would leave them ripped for a month so that people could look at you and know that there was pain. Rob, I think it's been about a year since Melissa's grandfather died. Is that? Yeah, I think it's about this week. Does that sound right? Yeah, right around his birthday. So just was thinking about her this morning. So you would rip your clothes and you would leave them ripped for a month. And that would sure make it easier for us to know that people were dealing with grief. If you could just look at someone and see that their clothes were ripped. And so you looked at these lepers and you knew that there was something going on. So they would rip their clothes, they would shave their heads so that you could see everything that was going on and you could see the skin disease, and you should cover your mustache and cry unclean. So if anyone came near you, you were to shout out that you were unclean. And that's what happens when Jesus comes near. Jesus comes near this group of these lepers, and they have to let him know by Levitical law that they are unclean. And so they're standing there, and you probably remember it from Life of Brian, but they're, wasn't it? Right? I don't know if I'll use that clip or not. But they are standing outside the gate of the city yelling that they are unclean. And you think about the mental anguish on top of the physical pain. So they've got the physical pain of whatever's going on in their bodies, and then they've got the mental pain of not only having to be away from their families and isolated from everyone else, they have to announce to everyone that they are unclean. He shall be unclean all the days he has the sore. He shall be unclean. He is unclean, and he shall dwell alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. And so they're no longer as nomadic at this point when Jesus comes along, but they have to be outside the village. So this is some research from the New Revised Standard. They have updated the New Revised Standard version of the Bible. It's the one that Matt and I preach from the most. You guys had been using the Contemporary English version for a while here, but we kind of moved back to the New Revised. We like it best as a translation of the Greek and the Hebrew, and they've updated it in recent days. So here's some of the questions they asked. Does it matter whether John the Baptist said he was not fit to untie the thong or the strap of his sandal? Because when people hear the word thong, their minds go in the wrong place. And so they had to decide, is it really a thong or a strap? And I think we have changed it to strap. I'm not worthy to untie the strap of your sandal as opposed to the thong of your sandal. Should a verse in Isaiah be changed from the poetic wild grapes to the more accurate rotten grapes, even if it's less pleasing to the ear? And so over the last couple of years, they've made 20,000 total changes in these Bible translations, which include alterations to grammar. Matt noted one in his sermon Sunday. Does anybody remember? They translated the word brothers as disciples to make it seem more inclusive. In the Greek, it is the word for brothers, but and it had that familial tone to it. And they changed it to disciples to communicate that it is for all people. And so they have revised the New Revised Standard. So how can there not be leprosy in the Bible now? And leprosy was a word. Give me the next slide there, if you will, Andy. It's become clear that today what we call leprosy, Hansen's disease, apparently did not exist in the Mediterranean basin in the second and first millennium, or even around AD times. So there's one case where understanding of the term has been changed by modern medical technology. So now if you go to the revised new RSV, I was in the new RSV, but if you go in the new RSVU, it's defiling skin disease instead of leprosy. I know that that's just fascinating for all of you. And they went through all sorts of layers of vetting to be able to change these things. Osti, now you know more than you ever wanted to about, and then there's layers of vetting that it goes through. Give me another 2 more slides. I think nobody needs to know all that kind of stuff. But most of the work was done via Zoom because of the coronavirus, and mainly because it was more convenient. And the general editors would discuss the proposed changes, and they decided to accept the proposal or reject or change it. So they went through a couple of letters of vetting, and they said it was fun because all of these specialists got to talk all over the world about this stuff. So during the pandemic, they resulted in this continuing process of revising the Bible based on some of the discoveries from the Dead Sea Scrolls and all sorts of other things. And finally, the last line I thought was very interesting. This is not about the politically winds changing course and somebody wanting a more conservative, more liberal Bible. You end up with something that's an improvement on the original, but you know some of our decisions were probably wrong. Some people will have to fix those in the next go round. Biblical translation is a much more difficult thing than you might think. The Hebrew was written without vowels, and can you imagine trying to figure it out? If you get the letters BK and that's your word, what is the word? Exactly. Yeah. So if you just have the letters BK, what's the word? Book, bike, Burger King. Yeah, there you go. So some of it's in the eye of the beholder. And that's why these biblical translations work so hard to try and communicate what the classical Latin and Greek say. But sometimes they have gone over the years for something being more poetic, especially in the King James. They wanted it to sound better, and sometimes they made the word sound better. The one that I like is not a translation at all. It's a paraphrase, and that's the Message. And the Message sometimes makes it easier for people to understand. And I think that is the point. And I do believe that the Holy Spirit intercedes for us between the physical words that are there and the word of God that comes into us. Then in Deuteronomy 24:8, take heed in an outbreak of leprosy that you carefully observe and do according to all that the priests, the Levites, shall teach you, just as I have commanded them, so you shall be careful to do. That's one of the other references. And then we go back to Luke 17. Then just one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his feet. So he was so thankful. He was so thankful. Have you ever been that thankful that you just wanted to lay down on the ground in grateful praise? And I think sometimes it is when we experience, or someone in our life experiences physical healing or emotional healing, that's when we want to just fall down in thanksgiving and praise. And then it's just like this line is thrown in, and he was a Samaritan. But I think if Jesus was just trying to tell a story, or Luke is just trying to tell a story about, you ought to be thankful. You know, I've heard sermons on this about, you need to write thank you notes. You know, if you should be more thankful. You don't want to be one of the 9. You don't want to be the one of the 9 who doesn't write thank you notes. I think it's got to be more. There's more to this story than just you should be more grateful. And Jesus is saying something about the one who is grateful as opposed to the others. And we'll explore that a little bit more on Sunday. But for me, this really takes us back to 2 Kings. Does anybody remember the story about Naaman, the commander of the army, back in 2 Kings? Back in 2 Kings, Naaman is commander of the army of the king of Syria. So he is also a foreigner. He's also a foreigner. And he was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord has given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but a leper. And which is interesting. How does he command the army as a leper? Did he have his own leper division? I mean, didn't that strike fear into the hearts of the enemy if you would send a group of lepers against them? I mean, I would run. I mean, if they're sending a group of lepers, it's just an interesting thing that he's got one of the commanders of the army who is a leper. And the Syrians had gone out on raids and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel. She waited on Naaman's wife. Then she said to her mistress, if only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy. Does this sound familiar? The prophet walking through, who is walking on the border of Samaria and Galilee, for he would heal him of his leprosy. And Naaman went in and told his master, saying, thus and thus said the girl who is from the land of Israel. Then the king of Syria said, go now, I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So he departed and took him with 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. Not interesting detail? 10 changes of clothing. Then he brought the letter to the king of Israel. Now be advised when the letter comes to you that I've sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may heal him of his leprosy. And it happened when the king of Israel read the letter that he tore his clothes. So you hear these things, the readers of Luke will hear the echoes of what is going on in the Old Testament. They'll know these stories better than most of us will. That he tore his clothes and said, am I God to kill and make alive? That this man sends a man to me to heal him of his leprosy? Therefore, please consider and see how he seeks a quarrel with me. He thinks it's a setup. I'm being set up here. I can't do this, because it wasn't the king. It was another in the kingdom. So it was that Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he had sent to the king saying, why have you torn your clothes? Please let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So now we have another prophet in Israel, and the people reading Luke would be like, okay, we see it. We understand that what was going on back in Naaman's time and how this is happening again, the prophet from Israel. Then Naaman went on his horses and chariots. He stood at the door of Elisha's house at a distance, right? And Elisha sent a messenger to him saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times. Go and show yourselves to the priests. Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you shall be clean. You have to do something to start your healing. So often we want to be healed, and we don't want to go and do the thing that we need to do in order to get the healing. I was talking to somebody this week, and they're struggling with alcohol. And in that struggle with alcohol, they just want to fix it. And I was like, no, you need to go to a meeting. You need to go and talk to someone. You need to go and see a counselor. But they really just want it to be fixed, as opposed to going and getting the help that they need so it can be fixed. Does that make sense? They just want it to be fixed. They don't want to go and do the work. And Elijah sent a messenger saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you. But Naaman was furious and went away. Indeed, I said to myself, he will surely come out to me and stand and call in the name of his Lord and wave his hands over me and heal my leprosy. It should be some sort of magical incantation. I shouldn't have to go through a process that gets me to healing. I should just be able to he should just wave his hands and God should do this for me. Isn't that the way prayer works? Isn't that the way healing works? If I could just snap my fingers and have God do that. And then here we continue to go. Are not the Abana and the far part of the rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in rage. And his servants came near and spoke to him and said, my father, if the prophets told you to do something great, would you have done it? How much more when he says to you, wash and be clean? So he went down and dipped 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And he returned to the man of God, he and all his aides, and came and stood before him and said, indeed, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. Now, therefore, please take a gift from your servant. So here is this foreigner who goes and does what the prophet says to do. And in going and doing, even reluctantly going and doing what the prophet has said to do, is then made clean, and then he converts to the God of Israel. Does that make sense? And the same thing, is happening, there's this one person who turns back and understands more fully who Jesus is. We don't know the rest of the story. We don't know what happened to the other 9. If you were miraculously healed and you had been sitting on the outside of the community, the outside of town for years because of your leprosy, what's the first thing you'd do? Go see your family, right? I mean, if you hadn't been able to be close to your family, so maybe they've gone to show themselves to the priest, and rather than going back to Jesus, they've gone to see their families. I wouldn't be too hard on the other 9. Jesus asked, "Where are they?" But that doesn't mean that that there's nothing for them. And then this wonderful story of Naaman's healing. But he said, "As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I'll receive nothing." And he urged him to take it, but the man of God refused. So then Naaman said, "Then if not, please let your servant be given 2 mule loads of earth, for your servant will no longer offer either burnt offering or sacrificing to other gods, but to the Lord. Yet in this thing, may the Lord pardon your servant when my master goes to the temple of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow down. When I bow down to the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord please pardon your servant in this thing." Then he said, "Go in peace." So he departed from him a short distance. And then there's a thing about greed. You can look at that, but I think I want to get to our questions. And then after this section in Luke 17, you get these words about the coming of the kingdom in verse 20. Once Jesus was asked by the Pharisees when the kingdom of God was coming, and he answered, "The coming of the kingdom of God is not coming with the things that can be observed, nor will they say, 'Look, here it is,' or 'There it is.' For in fact, the kingdom of God is among you." The kingdom of God is among you. And the way Jesus is bringing the kingdom of God is by bringing hope and healing and wholeness to people. So I've got a couple questions for you to consider. Jesus is all about crossing boundaries. What boundaries do you think Jesus is calling us to cross today? Who are our modern day lepers? Who are our modern day lepers, and how might we bring healing to them? Have you ever experienced true healing in your life? What was that like? When have you been demonstrably thankful? This is not just, "Hey, thank you." When have you just been overwhelmed with thanksgiving? And is there someone you need to go back and thank today? Got it? Any questions about the story? Any questions about leprosy and skin disease? Yes.
So just to clarify, the Samaritans would have also followed Levitical law?
The Samaritans would have also followed Levitical law, but they probably would have gone to a different set of priests to get, they're worshiping on Mount Gerizim, so they would not probably have headed to the temple to be clean. They may have headed to a different group of priests to approve them, but they're still both following Levitical law.
So they have to stay together. The lepers stay together in colonies.
Yeah.
They
They probably would have gone to see someone different. If I would told you to go to the priest, you would have gone to a different priest. One of them's going north, one of them's going south if they're on the border. They may have been headed in different directions. All right, discuss among yourselves. Thanks for listening.
Good morning, Bud.
Good morning, Brian. Good to see you again.
Yeah, since yesterday, right?
I know.
Hey, Brandon. Hey, Jack.
Morning, everybody.
So I can certainly read the question, but I came in a little late this morning. I'm on Central Time, and it's 6:45 here. Hey, Andy, welcome back. So what boundaries do you think Jesus is calling for us to cross today?
I think of that as the same ones he was talking about back then, to love our neighbor.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
Andy, we're picking up room audio too.
Oh, I'm sorry for that. Yeah, that's probably bleed through from my microphone. So
Okay.
let me put myself on mute and then just unmute. Is that any better once I put on myself on mute?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we speaking to the room, Andy?
Nope. You're just speaking into my headset. Yes, I don't know if there's a boundary that Jesus is asking us not to cross. So cultural boundaries, political boundaries, geographic boundaries, you name it. Okay. We need to take the gospel to everyone.
Yeah, I agree with that, Andy. It's the same as 2,000 years ago. Love your neighbor, and all that means, I guess. And kind of interesting timing with the upcoming political season too, and all the stuff that's going on.
Yeah, all those people that disagree with me politically, I need to love them. That's tough.
So the next question, Andy, is who are modern day lepers? And how might we bring healing to them?
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting to view that one too from Andy's expansive objective. Like that could be anybody, culturally, politically, just modern day lepers. Those that are on the fringes, at the outskirts of town, viewed as unclean by others.
So I know for a
Right.
while we go ahead, bud.
Well, I was just going to say, since you mentioned political, the lepers kind of vary based on what side you're on.
Yeah. Yeah.
What
Yeah, so I don't
community
usually-
you live in and so forth.
I usually don't think of myself as a leper, but I know other people see me as a leper, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think a while ago we could have made a direct comparison between leprosy and AIDS.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I was in a nursing home visiting my mother yesterday. And as I went by rooms, just, left and right, getting to her room. And I know I'm older now and I may be in a nursing home one day, but it's almost like they're lepers because nobody visits them. Now, I think I was the only visitor yesterday in the whole nursing home.
Wow.
And I'm sure others come during the week, but it was like, and I didn't really enjoy all my time with my mother because she's so different than the woman she was even 10 years ago. But it's how do we cross the boundary?
It's even worse than that for the old people. When during COVID, my mother was quarantined to her room, and
Yeah.
so she couldn't even go take a walk in the hallway. They brought her food to her room, her meds to her room. That room, and it wasn't a large room. It was her life for 2 years. And you're right, Jack, it did change her. over that time, besides watching cowboy movies, which was her favorite thing to do. There wasn't much for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
And
sorry.
then-
It's been hard. It's been hard for our folks in nursing homes.
It really
Sorry.
has. And my
Sorry,
mother,
Brian.
yeah, and my mother can only eat pureed foods. So, I mean, she doesn't like the food either. So it's kind of like being in prison with food that you don't like to eat. So,
She used to joke that she was in COVID prison, and I think that's a common theme in facilities for the elderly. She hated the food as well.
yeah.
This guy doesn't know how to cook an egg in the kitchen. He doesn't. The chicken tastes like rubber. I mean, that every time we talk to her.
Oh,
So I can tell you another group, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but another group that's near and dear to my house, near and dear to my heart, are people with mental illness and especially with addiction. And it is a very, very hard disease to understand and deal with. And most of us just don't talk about it. That's kind of how we deal with it. We just don't talk about it.
that's a good point.
Yeah, the correlation between that and homeless. Addiction,
Yes.
mental illness, and homeless folks who get passed by and are at the fringes of the village, kind of.
I was thinking of Brian Mclaren, who is an author. We were at a seminar of his a few years ago, and he was talking about people who are different than we are. When we look at the political spectrum, when someone's trying to be argumentative about their way of thinking, and you happen to be on the other side. And he had a way of coming back to them and saying, wow, I never thought of it that way. Why don't we get together later and talk about this? He knew how to diffuse a little hot situation. And I've used that and it works. Whereas either people will say, well, I really wasn't thinking that strong about that point, or they really do want to get together and talk about it sometimes. And it's a way of trying to understand the other in this hot environment that we live in, this political environment that we live in. But
Jack, I think that's a great answer to the second part of that question. How might we bring healing? Right. It is just to listen and try and find a place where we can have a conversation.
absolutely.
And we don't necessarily have to agree, but I can tell you for the mental illness stuff, have folks just talk and be heard.
And sometimes
we learn an awful lot.
Yeah, sometimes we're so eager to put our point of view out that we're not listening. And I'm guilty of that.
So has anybody ever experienced healing in their life? I guess that would mean that we were the leper and that we've been healed. So anybody ever been a leper, a healed leper or not a healed leper? I don't know.
Well, I don't know that I was a leper, but I certainly experienced healing. About 3 years ago, I had a hernia surgery gone wrong that ended me up in a Northside Hospital intensive care unit for a couple of weeks. And there was more than one doctor that told Mildred I wasn't going to make it out of there. So, yeah, I experienced healing, and yes, I was demonstratively thankful. And I went back to the ICU and thanked every one of those nurses and doctors, and they were grateful, but they were almost too busy to be thanked because they were healing somebody else.
Good point.
Sometimes you're healed by little things people say, and it's a surprise. I don't remember the details anymore, but I remember years ago I was working, and one of the people who worked for me came up and she said, I want to thank you for doing this or that or whatever, because it really changed, her feeling about the company and work and me and so forth. And when I did it, I don't remember it being something that I had purposely done to get that attention. I just thought it was the right thing to do at the time. So sometimes that feedback kind of reinforces that in spite of whatever other problems you may have and everything, you stumble into doing the right thing for somebody sometime.
How about you, Brandon? Jack?
Yeah, I got distracted there just for a second, Andy. What was
Yeah,
which one are we on?
So,
Healing?
yeah, have you experienced healing in your life? And
Yeah.
I said that means that we were the leper, but Brian pointed out not necessarily the leper. It's just we had some issue that needed healing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you were to slow down a beat and think about the many times, just like during the day you're healed, you know, I could maybe think of some big ones, Andy, you know, some demonstrative ones, but you know, every day you get a little bit of healing, relationships, physical, emotional, mental, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines. I think of the emotional and mental healing that takes place probably has been more profound for me than physical that I can remember. And that is people who give you words of encouragement when you were going through some stressful situations. And they don't even remember giving you words of encouragement, but you remember it for the rest of your life. You know, like, I'm glad that she or he said that. This is something that may have happened 50 years ago to me that still remember those words.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a style to it too. A lot of times you're more healed when people are indirect about it, you know, and ask, well, what's going on? And here's the story, or here's something, rather than come out and say, well, gee, I see that you've got this problem. Now, how can we sit down and address, you know, that
No.
sometimes not as direct as, you know, if you just kind of listen to somebody. A lot of times they just want to get something off their chest and it's important to them, and, you know, perhaps not as important to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the point about Naaman and what Phil pointed out this morning, you know, healing is a two-way exchange. You gotta accept the healing. You gotta be receptive to it. And so I think that's kind of how we could be healers and approach people might help in that, but we also got to be ready to take it and acknowledge it, recognize it too.
I think a conversion experience is a healing experience.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You think about it. I mean, where you felt broken and alone, and then all of a sudden you realize the presence of God in your life is a healing experience. I mean, where you haven't felt that before, but now you feel loved. Is the healing experience that God provides.
I'm glad you said that, Jack, because that's when I was thinking about when I've been healed and thankful, and somebody that I needed to go back and thank. I was thinking about my friend David from Georgia Tech, who really, through his actions and words, not directly to me, but brought me to Christ. It was he who did that, and I've never sought him out and thanked him. And yeah, it was a cathartic moment for me. It changed the course of my life.
This was a teacher. I missed the point.
No, he was another guy at Georgia Tech, and just a long story short, he got shot while we were at Georgia Tech and survived it. And from his hospital bed, he was praying for his attacker to know Jesus Christ. And I was just so moved. I saw an article in the school newspaper talking about it, and I was just so overwhelmingly moved by his, because I would have had a much different reaction. I would have been bitter and angry and vengeful and all the things that I would hate about myself. I would have been that man, and he was not. He was praying for his attacker and filled with love and compassion. And that was just such. I said, there's got to be something about church. He's got something I want, and it's got to have something to do with going to church. And I need to start going to church so I can find out what he's got. And that's been the change in my life. So
yeah, thanks for sharing that, Andy. That's a great story.
Yeah,
it was, and gentlemen, we can all be that person, right? I mean, Bud, you said it's you don't remember the things you do or the words you say, but right, other people do. they watch us, they see us. We can be that agent of change. We can be that salvation without even knowing it. So, yeah, I should probably seek David out and just go say thank you sometime. Well, gentlemen, we are at 7:59, I think. I'll wrap up. So I'm going to switch the camera back over and we'll have a closing prayer. So it is great to see all. It is great to be back from vacation. And yeah, hang on for the closing ceremonies here.
Thank you, Andy.
Andy, appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
All right, guys. I'm gonna wrap it up here.
Don't have any closing announcements other than thanks everybody for being here. I think, Chris, you're going to close us, correct? Okay. Anybody have anything before Chris closes us out? Anything we missed?